Hello everyone. So I am Emily Falcone and I will be presenting with Jenny about autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum disorder is a neurocognitive disorder. It is a spectrum disorder rated by its severity from severity 1 to severity 3. Some of the symptoms include social problems like communicating and interacting with others, so that can sometimes be ability to verbalize communication, ability to understand nonverbal communication, ability to interact with others in the way that neurotypical people do. It can include repetitive behaviors and limited interest in activities, meaning doing the same thing over and over again, like lining up your trains, for instance, for the young people with ASD. And having your trains be your only interest, and you don't necessarily want to share it with others some of the time. Usually symptoms can be noticed within the first 2 years of life because they tend to be developmental milestones that aren't reached. Babies that don't quite recognize facial expressions, like if you are upset with them and they don't realize that your face is saying that you're upset with them until you use the words that you are upset with them, for instance. And then there are symptoms that just generally hurt a person's ability to function socially, at school and at work, at home, all different kinds of places where you would need social interaction. And that is where different times in people's lives that they are diagnosed, because you can be diagnosed from any time in your life. Sometimes it can be easily missed. So here's what the spectrum placement can look like for some people. So there's two very different ends of the spectrum here. There's the high-functioning people who have previously been diagnosed with Asperger's, for instance. So they have really high IQs and are simply lacking what sometimes we would call like emotional intelligence or communicative intelligence. They are generally overall very high functioning. Then there are some people who are in between, with an above average IQ or an average IQ. And then some people have some learning disabilities that are mild or moderate, and then there's severe learning disabilities, which is like the classic idea of what autism can be. These are some of these clients are possibly not communicative at all. They are nonverbal. They don't use words to speak, but they can use sign language, and there's lots of other different ways to communicate, or are developmentally not up to their age group, so they might be in a development that is a few years behind what their birth age is. And then there's different criteria for each severity 1, 2, and 3. So diagnosis is based on developmental milestones. So it can start with 2-year-olds who aren't quite meeting those developmental milestones, all different kinds of different ones. It can be seen in elementary school if students are not interacting with some of their peers, are excelling in one area of academics but not in some of the other ones, and then also having some communication problems. And then for some people, it's not even recognized until they are adults, particularly because their symptoms just weren't paid attention to. They didn't have providers categorizing them as anything, or their parents weren't quite didn't know that their child's behavior was atypical. And as the slide says, it's really depending on the severity of the diagnosis. It can be easy or really difficult to decide whether or not a person is on the spectrum, as is often said. There we go. So here is a YouTube video that does such a great job of explaining exactly what ASD is, the history of ASD, and some of like the key markers for diagnosis according to the DSM-5. And beneath it is an added resource, which is Rebecca Burgess, who is a comic designer, drew, I suppose, a comic cartoon of what it is like to be on the spectrum, and that there are different kinds of experiences of people on the spectrum, and how, of course, that we as providers, but also just people in general, can be a little bit more sensitive. So if you want to click on over to that YouTube video or the link to that comic, you will get some fabulous information. Thank you so much for listening.